I finished watching TRIGUN Stampede. About a month ago, I watched the first 2 or 3 episodes just to get a feeling and a vibe for the show and to see if it was something that I might consider watching to the end, because I was a little bit conflicted on it when the promos were first coming out and we were getting the first trailers of TRIGUN Stampede. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that I'm the biggest, most hardcore Trigun fan of all time, because that is not true. I just really, really love the 90s anime version. Obviously, I was younger around the time that it first aired on Adult Swim, fell in love with it, and it's one of my favorites of that era. But until last year, I probably hadn't even watched that series for almost about a decade. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm, a super hardcore Trigun fan and I can, narrow it down and be able to tell you every specific detail of what the anime did right and what the anime did wrong. I'm just coming at from what I know of Trigun before to this new Trigun. And of course, one of the biggest deterring factors for me, and just take this with a grain of salt, I'm going to explain, was the animation style. Now, I am not saying that the animation style of Trigun Stampede is bad. In fact, after watching the entire series, I gotta say it's probably one of the better looking CG shows that I've ever seen, and the way that they perform the kinetic energy of the action sequences are done very, very well. There's a lot of good choreography with it. I think that the animation style, for what it is good. But the problem is that I am still very off-put by CGI anime in general, and there are moments to me where I just really don't vibe with this style. I think if you are a fan of CG animation, I think this is probably the standard that you want to set at this point. But if you're like me, and not only do I prefer 2D hand-drawn animation, but the CG animation to me a lot of times took me out of the show. There's a lot of times where it looked like a video game cutscene to me. There's a lot of times where you could tell that like the animation in CG is still a little bit janky here and there. There's a lot of times where I felt like the action sequences, though very well choreographed, were just kind of a little bit too all over the place to keep track of. Maybe that's just me being old and not being able to keep track of it myself. I don't know. But there was a lot of moments where the CG just bugged me. But I was trying my hardest to see past the CG and see into the merits of the show and the characters and the story that they were telling and be able to enjoy it that way. But this is a stylistic and aesthetic choice that they chose to go for this new version of Trigun. And I should not hold that alone over the head of the show when I'm looking at it or critiquing it or trying to figure out what the show is all about and what they're trying to say with it. So I'm going to try to not include my criticisms of the animation within this review. Not that I think that the animation was done poorly. It is just not a style, vibe, or aesthetic that I enjoy or that I like looking at. I would prefer all of my anime to not look like this. Every anime that I watch, I would prefer to not have this sort of like overbearing CG feeling to it. It's just not my thing. It's just not my style. That's not against the show. That's not against the animators. They all obviously worked very, very hard on this. I just do not like it. I don't like this style. I don't like this aesthetic choice. It's not for me. But now let's talk about the actual show. All 12 episodes, which was a little bit shorter than I thought it was going to be, but I guess it makes a little bit sense for what they were telling here. And there is a lot of differences between this version and the 90s version, and a lot of things where they took kind of ideas of what was happening in the 90s version, but twisted it or changed it a little bit or swapped out characters. And I do think things like that are pretty clever along the way. And I like that we saw a lot of the recurring characters, and I'm sure they are also characters in the manga too, kind of be in this version. But this is not a remake. This is a completely new storyline. This is a completely new setup from the original. In fact, even when we meet the characters, not only does Vash obviously look different, design choices are different. Millie is nowhere to be found. That's a problem. I'll get to that in a moment. The city of July is still intact. Knives has a much more prominent presence in this version than he does in the 90s version. Wolfwood's character is developed a little bit more, but changed, but I didn't mind the change as much. There's some things that bothered me, but I'll get into that in a second. But it's pretty much takes the idea of what you know, but changes the order of events and what the characters were doing and places them into new situations. So you have kind of the grounding idea of what we recognize as Trigun, where you have the desert landscape, you have Vash the Stampede, he's a wanted man, and you have, the set of villains that show up in the 90s version, but everything is kind of laid out in a different way. Obviously, the number one thing that you want to get right in a Trigun anime is Vash the Stampede, and in that, I think they did a very good job. Now, I waited for the English dub, which I know I lost a lot of you already. You're already like, you don't like CG anime, and you watch dub. I'm never watching this channel again. I understand. But I love Johnny Young Bosch as Vash so much, and I identify that character with that voice because that's just the version that I watched. So seeing Johnny Young Bosch be able to come back and voice Vash again actually really amplified my enjoyment of the show. So if anything, it makes me like the show more. A lot of the other characters, though, unfortunately don't have the original voice cast. I really thought Legato did. When Legato showed up, by the way, he was not in this enough. We needed more Legato. But when he showed up, I was super stoked, and he sounded very, very similar to the English voice actor from the original, but I looked it up, and apparently it was a different guy. So kudos to him for doing a very, very similar voice, you know? Vash is, of course, a pacifist character, and at the end of the day, he is trying to do the right thing, and his differences with humanity would make it seem like he is ripe to be that person that would want to have some kind of vengeance on them or to eliminate them entirely. But what makes Vash such a compelling character is his idealism towards finding that peace and finding that compassion, and him having that compassion from a young age, from Rem, and everything that they went through as children that led him to still believing in the kindness of human beings and that human beings are worth saving, and that he doesn't view himself as superior to them, which is the complete opposite of what happened with his brother Knives in the direction that he went. So Vash has sort of this core concept of believing in the best of people, which is a really hard thing to do, especially when you're living in a world that is so violent and chaotic with the Western vibe that it has. You're basically gunslinging all the time. He's a wanted man. There's a bounty on his head. You know, he has every reason to fight back, but he's trying to find ways around that so he doesn't have to. He sees the value in human life, you know, which is something that you would think somebody on his level would have difficulty doing. Also, he is a very goofy character. He's got a lot of comedic moments, but in this version, they actually tend to get serious very quick. Whereas in the 90s version, about half the series, like up until about the midpoint, is a little bit more slapstick when it comes to Vash. You don't really see him kind of like actually really fight that much, and he kind of gets out of his situations by being silly and putting on that persona of kind of being like a little bit of a dork. But here, even though he still has that persona, things get serious real quick. And I guess with only 12 episodes, half the length of the 90s series, I guess you got to get into it a little bit quicker. But after episode 4 or 5, things start to get really serious, and they continue to ramp up. And one thing that I did appreciate about it was the pacing of the series and how quickly things kind of got to a serious point, and they didn't kind of like meander around or waste their time. I think they really used every episode to its advantage and really escalated the events with each oncoming episode. With the other characters, I thought Meryl was pretty well done, even though she's a much more naive version of who she was in the 90s. But I didn't like Roberto. I wasn't a fan of Roberto. I was kind of upset about that beginning the series because I, of course, want to see Meryl and Millie together. And I think having Wolfwood there, Millie is a great counterpart for somebody to react off of back and forth in their relationship and their dynamic, that I was really kind of upset to not see that. And Roberto, to me, didn't really offer anything to the series that I felt really connected to. You know, he's kind of like the gruff older guy that's been through it all, seen it all, kind of keeping Meryl on track, but like at the end of the day, I was expecting some kind of big twist with his character or some kind of big reveal or a connection between him and maybe somebody else, but there wasn't really enough there for me to gravitate towards him. And it got to the point where when his character arc concludes towards the end of the series, I really didn't feel much for him, to be honest. For the character of Wolfwood, and he's always been, of course, a prominent, one of my favorite Trigun characters, he has also a much more younger, I wouldn't say naive in this case, I would say a little bit more tormented past, because we go into his backstory and seeing him as a child and the things that he went through and the experimentations, and you know, it gives you a lot more sympathy for his character and a lot more understanding. But I do think his like present day modern version wasn't quite to where I wanted him to be. He was very brash, which I guess is like a younger version of him, but I kind of like that, you know, tormented, kind of more stoic, again, a little bit goofy from time to time, but like You could tell he's masking something and hiding something behind his eyes, and he's got that experience. So I guess I wanted a little bit more of an experienced Wolfwood, but I thought, beyond that, he was really good. I would say, I think the main difference between Trigun Stampede and the original is that Trigun Stampede really, really delves into the lore of what is going on in this world. Like in the original Trigun, you don't really know a whole lot about what's happening on this planet. You get information as the series goes on, but most of it's kind of kept in the background. You don't really quite understand that Ash is like a living plant, and you don't really understand that humanity, was on these ships trying to find a new world and then crash landed here. You get that eventually. There's that one episode that delves into Vash's backstory in the 90s version, but a lot of it is kind of kept in the background and kind of gives you little clues as time goes on. And I kind of like that and prefer that, of having the little clues kind of sprinkled to you over time and for you to piece the puzzle together yourself. This version really just like straight up tells you this is what happened, this is the backstory, this is what the characters want. They are plants, and they are these living creatures that have this energy that power things, and they even get their power from some alternate dimension that we're going to tap into, and it just gets really wild. And I think that it was a little bit, honestly, I think it was like a little bit too much. I think that the last like 2 episodes of this series were just like really, really, really heavy with the lore. And normally I like lore, I'm a lore guy, but I felt like it was just like so much, and it just took it from like 0 to 1,000 without sort of like that climbing stepping stone in order to get there. Like, it really just tells you everything. It tells you what the plants are, what the experimentation is, what the energy is, what Vash is, what Knives is, and it's just kind of like everything is just given to you, everything's just told to you, and it just becomes a little bit too much all at once, where you're just taking in and soaking in all this information. And it's not that I don't want to explore this stuff or discover it or go, to as high a lengths as a Trigun series can go to. And again, I don't know what happens in the manga. Maybe this is a plot point in it. I'm not sure. I want to read it at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But I felt like it just went too hard too fast. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it just really wanted to be as bombastic as possible. Maybe they didn't know if they were going to get a season 2, and they just decided they're going to throw all their chips into one basket and just do as much crazy shit with season 1 as they possibly could. And to a level, I respect that. I kind of respect just going balls to the wall and just doing whatever. But I just really felt like it was a little bit too much too soon. And especially if they are going to do future seasons and more episodes, doing the whole Knives segment and, with what happens with him towards the end. I mean, anything's possible in fiction, but I feel like you kind of did that. So, there's other villains and other characters that are out there, but, and of course you can always create new characters too, but I just feel like it was a little bit, all at once, and maybe you kind of needed that second half. Maybe it was better to have 26 episodes instead, so you can kind of have those building blocks before things get so crazy in the last 2 episodes. Overall, I will say there is a lot of things to enjoy about this series. I think the characters are done very well, especially Vash, and that's the main point. That's the crux of what you have. If you nail Vash, you kind of nail Trigun in a way. I think that the action sequences, like I said, are very well choreographed, and there's a lot of intensity on the screen. It's just a matter if you vibe with the aesthetic style of CG animation, and unfortunately, I do not. I think that missing characters like Millie was an issue, and I think that it might have given a little bit too much explanation on the lore, where I would have preferred it to be a little bit more subtle. But overall, I do think it's probably something worth checking out if you're a Trigun fan. But for me, I'm a little bit in the middle of it. I think that if the animation style had been different, maybe I would have just kind of been a little bit more hyped for it. And if we would have given a little bit more time for the story to build, rather than explaining so much, I think that I also would have preferred it that way too. But at the end of the day, this is just my opinion, so don't worry about it. I'm just some dude on the internet. What I think about a show doesn't matter and shouldn't affect how you think about a show. So if you love Trigun Stampede and it's a 10 out of 10 anime for you, I'm not knocking you whatsoever. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just sharing my opinion because I review stuff on this channel, and this is a review. So that's how I felt about it. I would definitely watch a season 2 if it comes out. Again, I'd probably wait for the English dub so I could have Johnny Young Bosch as Vash. It's just not quite something I felt like was for me. There was a lot of stuff in it that I did like, and I liked little shifts that they did, like You know, the character that could control the worms, I like that they brought him back, but they didn't do the ending with him that they did in the original. They changed that and swapped it out for another character that Wolf would, you know. So I that was a change that kind of like shocked me. I was like, oh shit, I didn't expect them to do that with this character. So I like little stuff like that. But overall, yeah, it just wasn't quite my thing. And I obviously prefer the 90s original, but I'm an angry old man yelling at clouds. So what do you want? I don't really rate things like this, but I maybe give it like a 6 out of 10. So I'd say it's got a lot of positive aspects to it. It just wasn't quite for me. But besides that, that's my review for it. So what do you think, guys? What did you think of Trigun Stampede? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you finish watching it? Tell me what you think down below in the comments. Also, give the video a thumbs up and a comment to help it in the algorithm. And if you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I have channel memberships, Patreon, merch store, all that linked down below, along with the various social media links where you can follow me. So other than that, guys, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you next time.